I'm Dr. Jason J. Campbell, and I want to thank you for taking the time to watch my videos. This video is a video response to John Paul Prime's Occupy Wall Street Leftist Demand. I saw his video, I think he put it up yesterday. I saw his video, watched it, and he articulated what I think is the core value of the Occupy movement, which is a recognition that there has to be an economic Bill of Rights that comes out of all of this occupation, that we, the people, need to recognize that economic disparity inherent within the political discourse, within the way in which the system is constructed, is really the heart of the problem. One thing that I want to say in response to John Paul Prime's video and to the Occupy movement as such, a lot of people, I think, are misconstruing the intent in the occupation movement. As an academic, I'm not a participant in the occupation movement. I've attended now one protest and 2 assemblies with respect to occupation, and you'll hear the 99% versus the 1%. Occupation, as far as I'm concerned, is not about those who have versus the wealthy versus the rich. It is not an attack on people with wealth. I think that that objective is misdirected. It is an attack on the machine, on the institution which protects and offers economic safe havens for those who have wealth, not the individuals themselves. How many people in the Occupy movement go out and buy a lotto ticket? How many people in the Occupy movement are small business owners? A lot. So the point is, the reason why you buy a lotto ticket, the reason why you become a small business owner, is so that you can contribute to your community, but also that you can safeguard and create an economic means of sustaining your lives and the lives of others. The attainment of wealth in and of itself is not the problem. The problem is the mechanism in place to protect those who have economic wealth, who have amassed fortunes, from making their fair contributions to society. And I think John Paul Prime hit the nail absolutely on the head. The problem is we need to recognize that deregulation in and of itself is not going to, it has been proven in the 2008 market collapse to not work. And if we continue to support and buy into and swallow wholesale this concept of economic deregulation as the means of and the direction of contemporary capitalism, well, the recession is only going to get worse on a global level, and the Occupy movement is only going to get bigger. The one thing that I have to say, in my attendance at the Miami occupation over the weekend, one young man made, I think, the clearest demand that I've heard yet, and I've spent hours. I've been to probably 12 hours of occupation now. I've really sort of steeped in the occupation. As I said, I'm not a participant though. When I go, I'm observing. I don't talk. I just watch. I'm also not an organizer for the occupation movement. I'm not in the back end organizing the event. I'm a conflict resolutionist, and part of conflict resolution is facilitation. I would identify my role in Occupy as a virtual facilitator. I'm neither an organizer nor am I a participant. I'm a facilitator in the movement. I'm a virtual facilitator in the movement. And it was pretty moving for me to recognize that a day after I had spoke with Brother Cornel West, he was arrested in DC for his participation in the Occupy and protesting on the steps of the Supreme Court. What is a concrete economic demand that can be transformed, that can be changed, that is something tangible? I heard a young man at Occupy Miami talk about the Supreme Court's, and I actually have it up here, and I want to read a bit of this. The Supreme Court rejected corporate spending limits in 2010. And basically what this means is that corporations can spend limitless money endorsing particular candidates, either for the left or the right. It doesn't matter if you're left or right. Corporations have no limit to the amount of money that they can spend now. Again, I'm not politically motivated. I try to be as neutral as possible. both the left and the right have their problems. The occupation movement is neither a left nor a right movement per se, though I will direct your attention to John Paul Prime's video in the link to the left of me. Here's what President Barack Obama had to say about that. He said, quote, a major, right, he called this a major victory for big oil, Wall Street banks, health insurance companies, and the other powerful interests that marshal their power every day in Washington to drown out the voice of everyday Americans. Whether or not you believe that President Obama was being honest or sincere in that quote is irrelevant. What's relevant is the fact that that quote captures the motive of the people. It does capture the interests of the people. Whether or not you believe President Obama was being authentic is irrelevant. But the point is, insofar as corporate spending can reach astounding levels, hundreds of millions, possibly billions of dollars in backing their particular candidates, both left and right, what he says is a major victory for big oil, Wall Street banks, health insurance companies, and other powerful interests that marshal their power every day in Washington to drown out the voices of everyday Americans. The people want to have their voices heard. Here is the clip of the young man and what he said during the rally, which I think is very, very important to hear firsthand from a participant.
Mic check! Mic check! In 2010, the United States Supreme Court reversed its decision to ban corporate limits of funding of politicians and their campaigns. What does this tell us about this country? Who runs this country? We run this country. The people run this country. They say we lack focus. They say we lack specific demands. We're gonna voice our demand right now. Reverse the United States Supreme Court decision. We limit the corporate funding of United States politicians. Mic check! Mic check! Voice your demand, people! This is our demands. Specific demands will give us power. Specific demands will give us power. God bless you all.
What's important to recognize, again to John Paul Prime's video concern, is that deregulation must be the goal. We have to start with specific demands that attempt to address the process of deregulation. More regulation is needed. Our legislation needs to be geared towards increased corporate regulation. These demands need to be articulated insofar as we can, as John Paul Prime, I think, rightfully addressed, a new economic Bill of Rights. And that new economic Bill of Rights will be buttressed, will be built on increased regulation. Not to stifle the market. I'm a capitalist, right? Not to stifle the market. But there needs to be regulation in place to protect the people from, among other things, hot money investment, speculation investment of 401ks and people's pensions, just rampant excesses of greed. This is what the theme is in the Occupy movement, and for those participants who go to Occupy, you have to recognize that insofar as you are rallying against corporate greed, your rally cry is a cry for increased regulation, period. I'm not here to tell you who to vote for, I'm not here to be political, but you need to understand what your motive is. You cannot be out there arguing against corporate greed and then also in the same breath be arguing for deregulation policies. Your participation in occupation is absolutely ridiculous. You have to recognize, and you can go about making the decisions for yourself, but you have to recognize that deregulation is at the heart of the problem. And the occupation is an occupation, as far as I'm concerned, against economic deregulation on an absolute level. But don't take my word for it. I don't want you to take my word for it. I want you to look to some authorities. In the last video, I pointed your direction toward Paulo Freire's Education Critical Consciousness. And as far as Freire is concerned, I read a passage out of Freire. Today, I'm going to turn your attention to Jean-Jacques Rousseau, and the book is titled A Discourse on Inequality. A Discourse on Inequality. If you don't have the book, go buy 15 copies of A Discourse on Inequality. Rousseau basically says inequality comes from two avenues. There are two aspects in which we talk about social inequality. The first part is not necessarily relevant to the occupation movement, which is inherent natural inequality. The second part absolutely is relevant to the occupation movement, and for those of you who are organizers, or for those of you who are protesters, participants, as what I'm classifying myself as a virtual facilitator, I direct your attention to this book. Go buy the book, read the book. It's very short. You can read it in maybe 1 or 2 sittings. The second part of Rousseau's critique on A Discourse on Inequality is the following. So I want to read, and I'll create a link to the text itself. He says, Rousseau says, I discern sorts of inequality in human species. The first I call natural or physical, because it is established by nature and consists of differences in age, health, strength of the body, and qualities of the mind or soul. That one we're not so interested in. Not that it's not relevant, but it's less relevant. What we're interested in is the second with respect to the occupation movement. The second we might call moral or political inequality, because it derives from a sort of convention and is established, or at least authorized, by the consent of men. The latter, that is, the second, the latter, inequality consists of the different privileges which some enjoy to the prejudice of others. The different privileges that the 1% enjoy to the prejudice of others, the 99%. Such as their being rich, more honored, more powerful than others, and even getting themselves obeyed by others. Again, as I said earlier, the occupation movement cannot succeed if it's a movement against individual people, if it is against the man who is wealthy, the woman who is wealthy. The occupation movement is not about a movement against individual people who are wealthy. It must be a movement against the mechanisms in place to safeguard the economic prowess, might, affluence, ability of individuals who have wealth. So it's a movement against not the 1% specifically, but the institution, the mechanisms, the machine, which is set in place to protect the 1%. That's the nature of the movement. It's not man versus man, it's humans versus machines, and the machine being the institution in place to protect those who have power. The next part, quote, if we follow the progress of inequality in these different revolutions, we shall find that the establishment of law and the right of property was the first stage, the institution of magistrates the second, and the transformation of legitimate into arbitrary power the third and last stage. Thus, the status of rich and poor was authorized by the first epoch, that of the strong and weak by the second, and by the third, that of the master and slave, meaning that it eventually evolves, it eventually digresses to the point of chiefdom and servitude, right? It eventually becomes those who have and those who are enslaved by those who have. This is the ultimate end, which is the last degree of inequality, that being master and slave, and the stage to which all the others finally lead onto new revolutions, dissolve the government altogether, or bring it back to legitimacy. And then the last quote from Rousseau, he says, finally, I would prove that if one sees a handful of powerful and rich men on a pinnacle of grandeur and fortune, while the crowd grovels below in obscurity and wretchedness, it is because the former, those who have power and money, it is because, and listen to this, it is because the former value the things they enjoy only to the extent that the others are deprived of them, and because even without changing their condition, they would cease to be happy if the people cease to be miserable. The point is that, according to Rousseau, that the enjoyment of attaining is only satisfactory. It only yields satisfaction insofar as my possession of the thing necessitates in your lack of possession. The possession in and of itself isn't what is of importance. It's that I can have at the expense of you not having. This sadism, what I would classify as economic sadism, this economic sadism is enacted out of the desire to possess at the expense of another's inability to possess. That economic sadism is the problem. According to Rousseau, the mechanism, the machine in place to protect that and safeguard that economic sadism is the threat. It is not the individual wealthy person. It is not an individual who has money. What you have to recognize is that the occupation is a rage against the machine. It is not man versus man. It's man versus machine, and the machine as understood in terms of those policies in place to increase the deregulation of markets. And what we need to do, as John Paul Prime said, and I think he's absolutely right on this, is we need to make sure that we put into place that's Procession of the Nobles, by the way, which I think is sort of apropos. What we need to make sure is that we put into place those measures that would otherwise safeguard, protect the market from just rampant speculation. It's that simple. What I will do after this video, the next video that I will upload, will be a video, a poetic contribution and a poetic reinvestigation of the painting that I had done by Rare Art, which was humans versus, if I remember correctly, humans fighting machines in a rose garden for information or something like that. I will present to you the piece for a second time. Now, having heard what I've said now, and I'll let you think about the relevance, the deeper relevance of why I think that piece is emblematic of the occupation movement. I'll let you make that assessment for yourself. I want to thank you for taking the time to watch my videos. I'm Dr. Jason J. Campbell. Goodbye.